Hey my friends, the Philadelphia Eagles have officially released their first depth chart of the preseason, and there are already several details that deserve a much closer look. With the Eagles preparing to open their preseason against the Baltimore Ravens on Saturday night, this first depth chart gives us an early look at how the coaching staff currently views the roster, and there are some decisions that could become extremely important as the team moves closer to the regular season. Starting at quarterback, there is not much surprise at the top. Jalen Hurts is listed as QB1, and that makes perfect sense considering the strong training camp he has put together so far. But the more interesting battle is happening behind him. Andy Dalton and Tanner McKee are currently tied at QB2, and this is one of the competitions that could become much clearer during the preseason. McKee has reportedly had the better training camp up to this point and has looked like the better player, but Dalton brings something different to the competition. He has experience playing in multiple offensive systems, and because the Eagles are introducing a new scheme, that experience could give him an opportunity to challenge McKee for the backup job. This is exactly the kind of position battle that preseason games can help settle. And then there is rookie quarterback Cole Payton, who has quietly put together a good training camp. He may have been flying under the radar, but he is an intriguing athlete with a strong arm and legitimate dual threat ability. He is also a left-handed quarterback, which means his receivers have to adjust to a different ball spin. But according to the information coming out of camp, Payton has the ability to make throws at all three levels and can run the football with authority. That makes his preseason performance particularly interesting to watch. At running back, the current depth chart has Saquon Barkley as RB1, Tank Bigsby as RB2, and Will Shipley as RB3. The expectation presented in the source is that the Eagles could ultimately keep 3 running backs on the initial 53-man roster. That immediately puts some pressure on the players fighting for opportunities behind those top 3 spots. Dameon Pierce is viewed as a player who could be cut, while Carson Steele could potentially become an ideal practice squad option who could be elevated early in the season to help at fullback. Jaquandon Jackson is also listed in the running back group, so while Barkley's position as the starter is not a question here, the real drama is happening deeper on the roster, where every preseason snap could matter. Then we get to wide receiver, and this is where things become even more interesting. At the X-receiver position, Devonta Smith is listed first. Behind him, Hollywood Brown is listed as an outside receiver. The source suggests that ideally Brown could operate more from the slot, but that would create another interesting competition because Aeneas Smith and Elijah Moore are also in the mix for opportunities there. And Elijah Moore is someone Eagles fans should be watching very closely. He has reportedly been having an excellent training camp, and his performance could force the Eagles to make a difficult decision when it comes to the final wide receiver spots. The competition includes players such as Johnny Wilson, Darius Cooper, Britton Covey, Quez Watkins, and others, with some of them potentially viewed as practice squad candidates. At the slot position, rookie Aeneas Smith is currently listed first, although he has been out for around 2 weeks because of a hamstring injury. That absence makes the preseason especially important for the players behind him. If Moore continues playing at a high level, the Eagles could have a very interesting decision to make when they determine who deserves to stay. At the Z receiver position, DeJuan Mathis is listed first, with Darius Cooper behind him. Cooper has reportedly been one of the players making plays consistently throughout training camp, so this is another name worth keeping an eye on during the preseason. Danny Gray is also listed, although he is currently dealing with an injury. His speed gives him an interesting skill set, but the Eagles may have another option in Quez Watkins if they decide they need that type of player. The tight end position brings one of the more surprising developments on this depth chart. Eli Stowers, the second-round pick who won the Mackey Award as the nation's top college tight end last season, is currently listed behind Johnny Munt. That does not necessarily mean the Eagles have given up on Stowers. In fact, there are several reasons why patience may be necessary. Stowers is still developing as a tight end. He began his college career as a quarterback, and the transition to the position is relatively recent. He has also been viewed by some teams as more of a wide receiver because of his measurements and athletic profile. At the NFL level, there is naturally going to be a learning curve, particularly when it comes to blocking and adjusting to the physical demands of the position. The source also points out that Stowers has not done much throughout the summer, which raises some minor red flags. A redshirt type season could potentially be an option, and that would not necessarily be a negative outcome for a young player who is still learning the position. Behind them, Grant Calcaterra remains part of the tight end picture, while Cam Latu provides another intriguing option because of his blocking ability and positional versatility. Latu was used at fullback last season, and with the Eagles' offensive system potentially making use of that position, his versatility could help his chances of making the 53-man roster. E.J. Jenkins is another player the Eagles have continued to value, moving between the game day roster and practice squad. He has also made some impressive plays during previous preseasons. Stone Smart is an athletic converted quarterback who can make plays, but based on the current outlook, making the initial 53-man roster appears to be a difficult challenge for him. Now, when we move to the offensive line, another important battle starts to take shape. Jordan Mailata is the starting left tackle, with Fred Johnson behind him. Johnson's ability to play both tackle positions gives him valuable versatility. Miles Hinton and Holland Pierce round out the group at left tackle, while Landon Dickerson is the starter at left guard. Michael Jordan is listed behind Dickerson, and there is an interesting connection there because Jordan played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last season, whose offensive coordinator was Josh Grizzard. Grizzard is now the Eagles' pass game coordinator, so that previous schematic familiarity could potentially help Jordan as he competes for a roster spot. At center, Cam Jurgens is listed first, followed by Drew Kendall and Willie Lampkin. Kendall has reportedly had a solid training camp, but Lampkin has been one of the players receiving significant praise. His ability to play both center and guard could become extremely valuable, and based on the way players and coaches have reportedly talked about his performance, it would be surprising if he did not receive serious consideration for a roster spot. At right guard, Tyler Steen is listed first, with Jake Majors behind him. Majors played center at Texas and has also been getting work with Jason Kelsey this week. Rookie 6th round pick Michael Morris is another player to watch closely during the preseason. Then comes one of the most notable developments on the offensive line. Rookie Markel Bell has moved ahead of Cam Williams in the depth chart as the player being developed as a potential future replacement for Lane Johnson. That is a major development because Lane Johnson has indicated that this could be his final season. The source says Johnson has praised Bell as one of the more impressive rookies he has been around, and Bell's rise on the depth chart shows that the Eagles are already thinking about the future while still competing for the present, and that is what makes this depth chart so fascinating. It is not simply about identifying the starters. It is about seeing which young players are forcing their way into the conversation, which veterans are fighting to remain on the roster, and which position battles could completely change after the preseason games begin. The Eagles still have a lot to figure out, and the Baltimore Ravens game will provide the first real opportunity to see how many of these training camp evaluations translate onto the field. With so many roster battles happening at quarterback, receiver, tight end, and along the offensive line, every preseason opportunity becomes important. So after looking at this first portion of the Eagles depth chart, there is already plenty to debate. Which player or position battle do you think is the biggest surprise on this Eagles roster right now? And the surprises do not stop on offense, because once we move over to the defensive side of the football, there are several names and roster battles that could become extremely important as the Eagles work toward the initial 53-man roster. At edge rusher, Nolan Smith is listed as one of the starters, with Arnold Ebiketie, Jose Ramirez, and Joshua Weru behind him. One of the more interesting situations here involves the International Pathway Program. The Eagles are expected to keep one player through that program, and the player identified as the likely choice is 7th round pick UR Bernard. That situation is especially interesting because Joshua Weru is a former rugby player who entered the NFL as an undrafted free agent, while Bernard came to Philadelphia without football experience. The feeling presented in the source is that Bernard has more upside, which could give him the advantage when the Eagles eventually decide which developmental player they want to keep through the International Pathway Program. But the preseason will give both players an opportunity to change that conversation. On the other edge, Jalex Hunt is listed as the starter. Behind him is AJ Epinesa, followed by 7th round pick Keshawn James Newby. James Newby has been dealing with some physical issues and is viewed as a possible practice squad candidate. There is also an important name missing missing from the depth chart, and Eagles fans will immediately notice it: Jonathan Greenard. Greenard is still on the PUP list, which is why he does not appear on this initial depth chart. That does not mean his role has disappeared. It simply means that at this point, he is not available to be listed in the same way as the players currently participating in this competition. For the young edge rushers, however, this creates an opportunity to show the Eagles exactly what they can bring to the defense while Greenard remains unavailable. The Eagles also brought back Taron Jackson, who was with the team from 2021 through 2024. His return adds another veteran option to a position group where young players are trying to establish themselves. Now let's talk about the defensive tackles, because this is one of the areas where the Eagles could have some very difficult decisions to make. Jalen Carter is obviously one of the central pieces of this defensive line, and the depth chart also includes Byron Young and UR Bernard at one of the defensive tackle spots. The source makes it clear that Carter is viewed as a lock to make the roster, while Bernard is not necessarily expected to occupy one of the 53-man spots. The reason is important. If Bernard can remain in the International Pathway program, the Eagles would not need to use one of their regular roster spots on him. At another defensive tackle position, Jordan Davis is listed first, with Ty Robinson behind him. Robinson has shown flashes during the summer, and the preseason should give him an important opportunity to prove that those flashes can become consistent production. Zion Williams is also in the mix after joining the Eagles as a late undrafted free agent out of East Carolina. He is described as a good athlete, which makes him another player worth monitoring as the roster decisions approach. But perhaps the most intriguing part of the defensive tackle room is the third group, where the Eagles have Moro Ohomo, Gabe Hall, and David Blay. The source makes a very strong point about the quality of the Eagles' defensive tackle options, particularly when looking at the combination of Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Moro Ojomo. The question is not simply whether these players